In this people-led prevention video series produced by Landcare New South Wales, we're going to walk you through what a landslip is, how you might identify landslip risks on your property, techniques you may use to remediate landslip sites if you experience a landslip on your property.
So a landslip is really where a formation of land is undermined, quite often through water or just through movement. You end up with the slope moving down. So it can be a gradual thing, or it can be a sudden thing, as we've seen in this recent flood event of 2022 in the Northern Rivers. The way that you can see that your landscape might be prone to slips are a whole range of sort of factors that show themselves on the surface of the landscape. So you might see there's terraces forming on areas of steeper slope. You might see this area where there's movement of soil, so the soil actually breaks free and starts to move down the slope. Areas where water concentrates, so that's a really important area for us to be aware of. In our landscapes, on our farms, wherever water concentrates, we'll tend to have an erosion risk and a chance of slips. And the other thing is where you get different geologies over the top of each other. So the area behind us has steep slopes, it has a lot of concentration of water, it has a history of landslips. So this area once was a banana farm and it's a north-facing steep slope. So those slopes tend to be a bit more prone to slips just because of the slope, but also the geology of the site, the fact that there's exposed rocks. So there's a range of things you can look for in your landscape that will tell you that there might be a risk, but you can also see where there have been previous landslips, and you can have a think about how you might deal with the risk factors that are going to contribute to that getting worse, or ways of repairing it. And you can have a think about how you might deal with the risk factors that are going to contribute to that getting worse, or ways of repairing it. This site is really an important site, and I think it tells a story about the risk factors. It also tells a story about repair. So this site, it's steep, it has a history of intensive land use. Bananas as a farming system tend to be a bit prone to erosion, given that there's not a lot of soil cover. They tend to be on these steep slopes, and they're usually in warm, moist environments. So there's a whole lot of background risk factors, and then there's the fact that you're working on a slope. So one of the things to consider when we started planting these sites were a history of existing slips and slumps and creep. So there are different types of movement, mass movement. We had areas that had, basically the hill had given away. So when we started planting, we needed to consider that in terms of how we planted, what species we planted, and then what we did with the site to minimise the risk factors over time. Quite often, a lot of reforestation projects, they try and remove grass and the understory. Well, for us, it was really critical to hang on to anything that was holding this site together. So one of the problems with these high rainfall events is not only do you have the physical impact of the rain, as the slopes get wet, the soil starts to turn to a liquid and it just moves. And we have rock shelves, and above those rock shelves we have areas of wet sediments, and they just basically fall. And then they make their way, quite often they'll make their way into the creek, and you end up with debris and rocks, and you have this wave of mud and rock and debris, which is its own erosive force. So we have to design our responses to these risks. One of the challenges we have when we're trying to reforest sites, particularly where we have a range of really significant risk factors, is selecting the right species. So we have some species like the casuarinas, which are from our lower riverine environments. We've used them on the slope because they're really good at holding those slopes together. And we've used them really as an engineering structure to hold the site together, while the species that are really evolved for these sites and are conventionally used on these sites have a chance to get down, get their roots in, and really grow on these sites. So it's part of a transition. Quite often in a reforestation system, we want to work towards the sort of species that has been there over history, but what we need to consider is the modifications of the site that we're dealing with when we come onto it. So we're selecting some species to help create the right conditions so that those species that make the long-term forest structure have a chance to really develop.
Different landslips that we've seen in the Northern Rivers since the February 22 floods. We've seen some rock falls where there's just areas of rock that have fallen away. We've also seen what we call landslides, where a large piece of earth or rocks have literally just slipped down the hill. Sometimes these are referred to as slumps. You see them a lot in sort of rolling hilly country that's had cattle on it, been cleared from trees, and a whole piece of earth just falls away. We've also experienced debris flows and earth flows, and these look like massive lava flows that have moved through the area. Some can be kilometres long, and it's literally just the material is so saturated that it's turned to liquid and it's just moving down the slope at phenomenal speed. All can be really destructive, and yeah, we've experienced them all in this area.
The issues with the landslips are that drainage is chaotic and very erosive. Soils get lost and move into the rivers. The weeds take over the exposed soils, and usually access is very, very hard, and the soils that you come across are full of rocks, timber, topsoil, saturated clays, and a lot of water, so it's very difficult to do earthworks on. Predicting where a landslip will occur is a very, very difficult process, and there's so many factors at play. But some of the common issues that you need to look out for is steep gradients greater than 40%, vegetation that's been recently cleared or has been cleared for generations. If you've got excavations at the toe of steep banks, which changes the slip profile. And if you've got extra drainage going into a steep profile that wasn't there before, extra water, water bodies placed on these lands, they can all exacerbate landslips. So landslips, when they occur, create large debris piles. And in this terrain in the far north coast, there's drainage lines below every steep slope. And so a lot of the debris ends up in the river system, the creek system, creating sedimentation issues. The timber debris falling into the river can create scour points on riverbanks where it flushes through and widens the riverbank. Plus also the loss of biodiversity with forests being removed in the slip.
So when it comes to landslides, there are things that you can do to help prevent landslides, but they can still happen. They're a natural geological reaction when you have that amount of rain. So knowing what you can do if you have a landslide can certainly be helpful in actioning the remediation process. So within a week or two after the flood event that caused all these landslips, Richmond Landcare got in touch with us just to find out how we were going and whether we'd suffered landslides. And when they found out we had, they organised for geoengineers to come out to do a basic assessment. We learnt from them that we actually live below what is an ancient slip. So above us we have dwellings, it's a flat, and basically when you get a flat on the side of a hillside, that flat is an ancient slip generally. So it might be 50,000 years old or something, but once upon a time that slipped. And when you get those really severe weather events, it's the front of those slips that tend to let go and reactivate. And so that's what we have here. The amount of water, the water table was so charged, it was just like a spring vomiting out of the side of the hillside. And so this rock came down the hill with it, along with this one, and along with all the mud that well, it's now dirt, but at the time you couldn't step here, it was just liquid.
Our maps are very broad in terms of landslip prediction, and I think if we can have a greater resolution, then people can be more confident in risk prediction for landslips in their particular area, and that is really important for their confidence into the future. So some of this technology that has been applied in post-2022 flood will give us information now, it will give us information into the future as we look back upon that footage. And landslips are particularly problematic because they tend to rip the earth right down to the subsoils where not much grows, so that scar remains for months and months and months, and those scars feed further sediment into the streams in a continuous way. Every time that there's a rainfall event, it's really important to cover that material with some sort of mulch and preferably with plants over time. And that's what hydromulching does. And I think there's a great potential there.